Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Do It Big Shit Today podcast. I am Hannah. I am here with Rusty. Hello, Rusty. How are you?
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on. I'm
Yeah.
very excited to chat with you today. This is a very cool space, cool journey we're about to embark on and all the things. So for folks listening, Rusty is a associate marriage and family therapist,
hmm
a very rad one at that, I might say.
Well, thank you.
Of course. And this episode is going to be kind of dedicated more to I wouldn't say necessarily mental health, but kind of getting into the weeds a bit about navigating anxiety, talking to you a bit more about your career change, doing kind of COVID and following your gut and intuition and passions to kind of take you from marketing to entering the therapy realm and kind of not entitled, but what kind of took you on that journey to begin with, and then getting into the granular of, I'll say these as bullet points, but you'll, I'm sure, dive deep more into this: stress and burnout management, perceived time poverty, understanding the limitations of talk therapy, and kind of more the power of silence, which I've kind of come to know and appreciate. And we'll talk a bit more of, how we can do things in our day-to-day to positively impact our mental health space. Yeah, you shake your head.
Sounds like a plan to me. I was thinking about this before we started. I was like, oh my gosh, I think I might be taking this whole. I hope I have a frame here, and I've thought about this for the listeners. You sent me a few questions before we started,
Mhm.
and I was picking up a theme, and I hope that we can kind of. I think I can kind of see where we're driving.
Yep.
And I have a way, and I'll ask you to kind of come on this journey with me, because I have a way of thinking about this that I think it'll be interesting to navigate.
I'm here for it.
Let's do it.
Hell yeah. Okay, cool. So, based off of what I've gathered through your website and just kind of meeting you briefly and us chatting before this podcast, so one of the things you call out is that your goal as an associate marriage and family therapist is to help your clients and people that are within your realm to help navigate challenges, build resilience, and achieve emotional well-being. So
Yeah.
talk to me about, before we kind of jump into the amazing space that you're building career-wise for yourself in the mental health space, talk to me about kind of the transition about marketing over to what you currently do now.
When COVID hit, it was an opportunity for me to decompress. I was living in LA at the time, and my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, we looked at each other. We were like, this single bedroom apartment is not going to cut it. We're now both working from here. All these 2 and 3 bedroom apartments are ridiculous in LA. What can we do? Let's work together to figure this out. So we moved out to Palm Springs for what was going to be 6 months, and now it's been 4 years. So we were we needed space. I think having that space, having that physical change in environment was helpful for me to really take inventory. And I was reading Paul Bloom's Against Empathy, which is an incredible book. I can't recommend it enough. But it's the case for rational compassion. It's a great book. And I was reading, there's one part of it where he was explaining therapists ideally would model what it would, they wouldn't ideally be the ones being the empathetic ones, which I thought was a pretty radical, interesting idea. But it landed with me, and I was like, that makes a lot of sense, right? It made sense to me in a way where I was just like, I think I need to do that. Like, where I was like, I felt called in that moment to, I was like, I think this is actually what I'm supposed to do. And I told my girlfriend, or fiance, I guess at the time, she eventually became my fiance. I was like, I think I want to be a therapist, just kind of throwing it at the wall. And she was like, I think you'd be really good at that. And yeah, within a month, I was at
Shout out.
Pepperdine.
That's amazing. Also, that's an amazingly supportive fiance. 'Cause I met a
She's
lot
great.
of, that's awesome. That's so cool.
Yeah.
You're able to kind of pinpoint what exactly, just so many things. The space recognition, like,
Yeah.
let me get out of this. Let me get out of LA. Cause I feel like LA, I'm very tucked over on the west side. So I'm not in the heat of it.
Right.
It can be so saturated and like almost the energy level being so like dominant where it's like, oh, I must do this. I must do this. Like, do you?
Mm-hmm.
Do you? Is this needed? Or are you just kind of following the crowd? Is
Yeah.
that so? To recognize that is huge. And then to kind of just let yourself be for a moment and breathe and then just fucking going for it. That's
Yeah. Well, I knew I wanted to go back to school. Part of me when I
okay.
was younger thought that was law school. That wasn't it. And it's to me, it was a culmination of like, I had been open-minded long enough and created, I think, enough enough space to be curious. And I think that's the biggest thing of where it's like, I had lost a lot of curiosity because I had so much pressure from my work, from just being in LA, just like you're constantly thinking about, okay, I've got to modulate traffic and all these things that you're giving so much space to. Whereas like when you live in New York, you don't really have to think about those things. You have more space to think, right? Like you're on the subway, you can think, you can daydream. Whereas like in
Oh,
LA, it's harder to do that. And it was harder for me to be curious. And so like coming out here, my wife and I had visited here several times, and it was just like it's a lower frequency. It was a lower that I was ready for. That like I think was creating the right conditions for me to be curious enough to really get what I was supposed to be doing.
mhm. I could see that. I think LA has or from a personal experience, I think LA is great for a kickstart. You want to
Mhm.
kickstart something,
Yes.
but if you want to expand it in different ways,
Yeah.
like you said, get curious. Sometimes you have to kind of give it some
LA is great
space.
for collaboration. I really like
Mm,
LA because there's so many other people that are interested in doing things and making things and getting together with them. Most people are down to do that, provided they show up. But it's very different than New York, where it's like very much like do it yourself. Like, so I liked that. I don't know. I learned a lot from both experiences, but you're right. Yeah.
yeah, that's awesome. It's ballsy and scary, I'm sure, but I bet you're looking back at it now. So glad that you did it.
Yeah, I mean, I've moved a lot in my life, and I found value from changing up my environment a lot. I'm good now.
Mm-hmm.
I've done it enough now, uh, but you said that you lived in New York. I was listening to another episode. You lived in New York, did you not?
Mm-hmm. I did. I
How did
did.
you
Yeah.
find it? What did you learn from New York?
I learned so much in New York. I feel like I I don't know if it was just kind of like a subconscious thing, like growing up watching Friends when I was
Mm,
itty bitty. But I went to New York with my grandma and my mom when I was really young. And I knew, I think it was maybe 10. I was like, I know I'm going to be back. I know I'm
mhm.
going to be back here. And so I kind of like came back to California, lived on the Central Coast, teeny tiny little spot, and worked my ass off, went to high school, graduated from college, earned a scholarship so I could provide me freedom to kind of do what I wanted post college.
Yeah.
And prior to COVID, I had found a job that I was traveling all over the world for. I was single. I was 22. I was like, why would I not do this? I've
Right.
always wanted to do it. And so I sold all of my shit. I had 3 suitcases and I had maybe I think it was maybe 2 months prior, a client of mine was launching an event in New York. And so they flew me out to host that event. And so
Mhm.
while I was there, I did a red eye and I looked at apartments. It was kind of like one of those things where like the universe sort of falls into place
Yeah.
and kind of lets you know you're doing the right thing.
Right.
So on that work trip, I was looking at apartments and I sold all my stuff. It was in a pretty janky building. It was 6 floors, no elevator. I was on the top floor. But it was also a really sweet deal. I don't know how I got it. And I signed the lease when I got there. I landed at like 5 in the morning, took a taxi, carried all my shit upstairs. And it was I was there for a little under a year. And it allowed me to just sit with myself and allow me to figure out who I am, what's important. Like dating in New York was such a learning experience. I learned a
Yeah.
lot about what I wanted and didn't want in a partner.
Mhm.
I learned about like just being, like you said, being curious, looking up. I was listening to a podcast. It was like, stop looking down, look up. And I would look at all these buildings and I'm like, like the financial aspect, how does that work? So I got like So it was just kind of an amazing space just to explore and kind of what you said, like be curious,
Totally.
where I was able to learn a whole lot more about myself. But New York is a magical place. Magical place.
Absolutely. I tell people all the time, it's like you can live, uh, 4 different lives between the time it takes you to get from your building to the end of the block or to the subway. Like you can see so many, like the amount of things that you would see, in the walk to the subway.
Mm-hmm.
It is like, especially like me being out in the desert now, it's like I could see literally more in like an entire month in a walk from like my apartment, of like whether an apartment's on fire, or a dog's got loose, or like but I could see so much life, or like an argument that a couple's having or whatever.
Yeah.
And there's something to be said about witnessing all that and just noticing, like, and being a part of that much life. It is cool.
It is very cool. I
It's
highly
also
encourage.
unsustainable. It's like
That was my point.
ridiculous.
Like I remember, I just didn't fit with the lifestyle. So it was great to be there, but like I like to cook, and so I
Yeah.
would take the subway to Trader Joe's on 32nd. I think it was 32nd or 34th. Or no, I'd take the subway down and get my groceries, and I'd buy I get an Uber, $35 Uber back up. But I
Yeah.
would still save money doing that than I would be just going to like the local New York grocery store.
Yeah.
Because it was so expensive. So it's like, it's amazing to visit New York. It's another thing to live in New York.
Yeah.
So
When I moved out, I mean, I like to tell people New York chewed me up and spit me out, but I mean in the best way. Like it was like I did not belong there, and that's okay. Like it's good to know, like the city knows who it is, and I brought nothing to it. I was just a tourist for a long time, for like 2-year tourist. That was effectively what was happening. But yeah, like even you said, you're like, I like to cook. It's like, okay, these things that you learned about yourself. It's like I like to do this thing. I need space to do that, right? I need a lifestyle that allows that, and I think these are all really great things to learn. Yeah.
Yeah. I also, because I have like my list here. This is a great segue. New York, I think, is one of the best ways where I learned about kind of that burnout management, which is one of the things I wanted to talk with you about.
Yeah.
Is because it's literally a city that never sleeps.
Mm-hmm.
Truly. And so you have to be really strong with how you dictate your day, because it just, from walking to the subway to being on the subway to walking to your next place, the days seem to go by even quicker. And then LA has that as well, but I feel like I'm trying to figure out how the best way for me to segue this, and I'm failing dramatically. So I'll just go out and just go out and ask. So from your perspective, being environments aside, New York, LA, tiny town in the suburbs or something like that, I feel like, especially maybe with working from home and juggling multiple passion projects, work, and all of that, the burnout has become more of a norm. And it's also the norm to multitask.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this. I'm just going to leave it at that, because I feel like you've got a lot of great stuff to talk about for this.
I think there's a lot of folks that, frankly, haven't done the work to figure out who they are, and nor do they feel like they have the space to do so or the time to do so. So it leads to this idea of perceived time poverty, which I've been thinking about a lot recently. I hear a lot of clients say, I don't have the time to do that. I don't have that. When in reality, it's like, yeah, we make time for things. Like we do have the time. It just feels like we don't, because all of these pressures of work, our family life, all these things, sometimes even religious aspects, other financial obligations creep in, and they start driving everything in our lives, right? To where we've kind of, and I think to some degree what we're talking about is anxiety. Anxiety starts to take over, of like, all of a sudden we're just speeding down the road. We're not really taking time to notice. We feel like we don't have time to notice. And, next thing we know, we wake up, it's 2 years later. And burnout can take over, within 3-6 months. Like you lose your way in a work environment, burnout can take over faster than you think. And if you've experienced it before, you're more likely to experience it again. And it's more likely to be more impactful even that second or third time that you experience it, to where eventually we just crash. Um, so yeah, I guess I'm curious what you think about that, and maybe curious about your own experience with burnout.
Yeah, I mean, it's something where I learn by, and I feel like my alma mater would love this, is I learn by doing. So someone could tell me like, watch out, you're going to burn yourself out. And I'm like, great, I need to do that. And I won't, like, I have to ram my car into the bumper, which
Yeah,
sounds kind of catastrophic, in
yeah,
order to figure out where my boundary lines are. That's
yeah,
just the personality type that I am.
yeah,
Um, I'm also very driven. I think a lot of people are. I think you, actually, I'm not sure if a lot of people are. I assume people that listen to this podcast are. I have a lot of athletes, so that takes a level of
yeah. The
drive
listeners
to
probably aren't, but I would
the
honestly
listeners
say
probably are.
most people aren't. Yeah,
For me, the burnout kind of stemmed from trying to, at some point, you can juggle as much as you can. You have passion, like, and I think about this as well, and I'm not sure how, if women out there feel the same way, because there's also like, I want to have kids one day. So, how in the mother of God am I going
right.
to factor that in?
Yeah.
So I have a job. That's what keeps the lights on, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that is a big one. I have my mental sanity, which I gather from running and my side hustle. It's my little piece of whatever the fuck the life throws at me. I have my little space, this podcast, my races that
Yeah.
are my safe space.
Mm-hmm.
That's priority number 2. And then, you throw in like the importance of social life, family life. I'm not religious, but I do, I'm learning to more understand taking time out of my day to meditate, yoga. So there's all of these things where it's like, oh, it'd be good to do this, it'd be good to do this, like reading, learning, diving, being curious, like, and then I'm at a point where I just got married. I want to have kids soon. So how in the mother of God do you navigate that? And there isn't a rule book that's fit for just you. So for my personal journey, it's been figuring out, okay, how much shit can I have on my plate till I lose my crap? And then let's take some of that off. And then let's try
Mm-hmm.
this again. So it's kind of like one extreme back to normal, one extreme back to normal, kind of figuring out what's too much.
Yeah. Yeah, and that can be like a whiplash, right? Like that can
Yeah.
like I hear this a lot with my clients as well, where it's just like this feeling of where it's just like, I mean, it can be jarring, that feeling of like, okay, this is too much or you too little, um, to where, and it's interesting to me, like you said, you were like, I'm somebody who learns by doing. That's who I am. That like this is how you perceive yourself, and what I would offer up is like, get curious about that aspect of that self-belief, right? Like, of like, okay, that is one way to think about it, because even the name of this podcast is really interesting, because it's like, do epic shit today. There's a lot of pressure in that name. Like, I can tell a lot about you simply by the name of your podcast. And like, look, these are great things, really great at motivating somebody, but it's that you do epic shit today every day, you will hit a wall. It's not sustainable, right? Like, so
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is there are aspects here that are helpful for you, that I think are helpful for a lot of people. But it is learning, okay, there are limitations to certain beliefs, mindsets, and mantras that we have, that, and kind of taking the inventory of those things of like, okay, how much is this thing actually serving me?
So then, because I guess this is quite interesting, and I hope I can speak this correctly. So when it comes to burnout, and I
Yeah.
think that there's a balance to the burnout. I feel like that's the key to a lot of stuff, is the balance.
Yeah.
So like when you say, for example, like do epic shit today, it can be
Yeah.
with vengeance, and it can
Yeah.
be a mom who just had a baby who goes for a walk. That is her epic shit for
Right.
today.
Right.
So it's on a spectrum.
For sure.
But would you say, in regards to balance and burnout and how the correlation exists, I'm curious to get your thoughts rather than people who kind of like go to one extreme and then come back. And it's like, okay, I'm not going to go for a run. It's too much. I got to go back here versus just having an overall, okay, I'm going to go for a small run and
Yeah.
that's okay. Because I
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
like that nice inner dialogue is really hard muscle to refine and stretch. There's all this beating up, this self doubt, this why can't I do that? And so
Yeah.
I'm curious from your perspective on your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Can I first say that burnout, the best way to manage it, deal with it, think about it, is to prevent it. Like it's not something that we should normalize. I think that's important to
Yeah.
say, because the definition of it is like, okay, we're doing something that's unsustainable, and it's
Mm-hmm.
really important to get really curious about the different aspects of that unsustainability. And the problem with that I see for a lot of folks is that may be a really deep that may be a lot of work, where it's just like, oh, I built my whole life on certain things that it's like I can't start taking inventory. I can't do that. I'm going way too far down the road, way too fast. I can't do that. So burnout gets normalized to some degree. And I think that's really dangerous, where it's like we do end up crashing. We do end up, developing substance abuse. We do unhealthy coping habits. That ultimately, I think it's a question of sustainability, of what is
Mm-hmm.
going to be the most sustainable, most universally applicable way to live my life. And that's different for different folks. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, or but
Yeah,
I think
you
that's
totally
important to
are.
say, of like figuring out ways in which you're able to control different aspects of your life in ways
Mm-hmm.
that are important for you, to where you can modulate certain aspects of it to where burnout is preventable. It's a long process, but it's a necessary one, right? Of
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think because I think a couple things. One, we normalize and romanticize, especially on social media, the burnout. Like you see all these videos of
Yeah, the
like
grind, the
the
hustle.
grind, it's like,
Yeah.
yes, grind yourself, but like
Yeah.
not grind yourself, but like, go for it, but also like come up for air. So one of the things like I've been telling myself is I did this challenge last week where for 5 days in a row, I'm gonna jump in the ocean. I live right by it. I'm jumping. It makes my heart happy because I think you get so caught up in the grind that you forget to be human. And when you
Yeah.
forget to be human, that's when like it gets not professional, just outsider looking in. I feel like that's kind of the triggering point. So when you
Yeah.
forget to do things that make you human,
Yeah.
that's when it really starts to hurt.
Yeah. And even like when you see yourself, just kind of as you said, when you see somebody else as when you see yourself, I'm sorry, when you see yourself as somebody who does things and learns by doing things, you're
Mm-hmm.
doing things more or less all the time. And when we're doing things, we're not, it's very hard. I haven't really thought deeply on this, but when we're doing things, it's really hard to feel things. So we're putting off a lot of feeling things and, emotions when we're really just being like, well, what do I need to do? What am I need to be? Or like even that mindset, right? So, and I think that is the part where it's like when we're always doing things or looking for more things to do, adding more things to our plate, more goals and all this stuff. That is when we kind of we're starting to push down on the accelerator a little bit.
And I can feel that too. I don't know if you've ever experienced it, like when you have like an insanely busy couple of days where you're just like, I need 10 minutes just to sit. And I think that's probably what that is it's just allowing yourself to feel, to be
Yeah.
human, to breathe, to relax. I call it alone time.
Mm-hmm.
I need alone time.
Yeah,
Give myself a little
definitely.
time out.
Yeah.
Um, but I am curious from your perspective, rather than going from middle ground to the extreme, are there signs that people can be aware of, like, hey, I'm kind of leading towards burnout.
Yeah.
I'm not going in a great direction.
Yeah. I mean, the number one thing I would say is uh really is to get used to it taking inventory of your body, like scanning your body for, like, for even right now as we're sitting here, it's just like kind of just even just thinking, okay, where am I? Is there any part of my body that I'm feeling, particularly activated? So for me, for instance, I start feeling pressure underneath my shoulder blades when I start feeling anxious. And it's really important to get curious about these aspects of how these pressures are showing up in our body, because they will. Um, I think something that's really important to understand that I kind of learned recently is there's simple emotions and there's complex emotions. There's primary and secondary emotions. So primary emotions are kind of like happiness, sadness, anger, interest, even, which is kind of adjacent to curiosity. Then there's secondary emotions. Secondary emotions are more complex. It's usually like two or more primary emotions happening at the same time about something. So that's guilt, shame, resentment, all of these different things. And I think it's really important because those secondary emotions at some point start showing up in our body. So when we are, and I'm not talking about just going for a run and you're just sore and that's like what that actually is. That's fine. That's not what I'm talking about. But sometimes when you set, like, for instance, anxiety shows up for different people at different times. And I think it's really hard to have burnout without feeling anxiety. So, and you will feel that somewhere in your body. So to answer your question, are there ways that people can kind of I would just, encourage folks to really tune in with their body. Sit for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and somewhere, lay somewhere, and really just kind of be like, ooh, oh yeah, my chest. At some point, certain things show up in my shoulders sometimes. Some things show up in my chest. I feel like a real pressure. It's important to get curious about, where is this coming from? What am I feeling? Identify what that feeling is, and then try to figure out what that feeling is trying to convey. What is that message behind that feeling? And sometimes that can be really helpful in understanding, what's going on. It's like, oh yeah, I'm really feeling like I'm going to get an email from my boss again at 9 p.m. because I'm really anxious about it and I feel it in my back, right?
Right.
Those things add up to where it's like we start feeling it. And then I think eventually at some point that's your body saying, this isn't sustainable. Like, we're going to burn out, right?
I don't know if you've heard the quote, because I used to struggle with this where I was like, I don't have 5 minutes to sit. And the person who claims they don't have 5 minutes to sit needs to sit for 5 minutes even more.
Yeah.
Or I think I'm butchering that incorrectly.
No, absolutely. Our resistance is where we are resistant is where we need to focus, right? If we're even telling people sometimes, you say, yeah, I'm in therapy. And some people are just like, what? Why are you in therapy? What are you working on? Like, that's dumb. Those folks should probably get curious of, why is this something why are we hating on somebody's wanting to get better, feel better?
Yeah.
Right? Or even just simply understand different aspects of themselves. Why is that evoking a negative response for you? Right. Those are the aspects of our, or like because those things that we tend to push away, those things that we resist, are the things that we don't like about ourselves, the things that we are insecure about. That's where the work is, right?
Yeah, I could see that for sure. And I have on our notes kind of the power of silence as well. Is that kind of the correlation between kind of just sitting with yourself?
Yeah, this is the limitation of talk therapy, I think. And I've thought about this a lot recently. Is a lot of people go to therapy, or they've been in therapy for like 5 years or something like that. And talk therapy is really helpful for folks that feel anxious. Sometimes it's really helpful to just talk about that anxiety and kind of get to know it and understand it. But there's a limit to it. There's a limitation to talking about something. And there's a neurological reason for this. And I'm not a neurologist, but so I'll butcher this the best way that I can. But we live most of our lives, when we're talking, when we're processing things, just like as we are right now, in our neocortex, which is great. Like, we can process things, 1x speed there. There's other aspects in parts of our brain that we can process 10 times faster than that, like a subcortex, for instance. That is like the part of the brain that's tapped into our limbic system. That's where we really get to feel these aspects. Like, okay, how is something showing up in my body? What does that mean? And we can process, okay, what is it? This is coming up for me. Oh, I'm feeling really tight in my back. Ooh, I think I'm angry. I think that's anger there, right? Like, what am I angry about? And so anyways, what I'm saying there is there's limits to talk therapy that just doesn't provide enough space for us to really get curious about feelings in our body, really feeling and processing things in our body. Because something I see with clients often is they'll be like, yeah, I've been in therapy for 5 years. I know all of these things about myself. I know where my traumas are. I know the dynamics of my family, right? But they haven't felt it. And that's the difference between like a top-down approach to therapy, which is kind of what talk therapy is. It's like CBT, things like that. Oftentimes you'll see CBT kind of used first, or psychodynamic approach.
Is that cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT?
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically identifying different behavioral processes, basically aspects of our brain, and figuring out, certain narratives and stuff like that. Of like, okay, where are some points that could probably be refined and serve us better, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is a top-down approach to therapy, which is really helpful. I think it's really helpful to get people in to therapy oftentimes, or to start. It's a helpful place to start, because people are used to talking about their problems, right? At some point, there's a ceiling to that. There's a limitation where it's like, okay, I've talked about it enough and I understand it, and then the aspect of like really getting to feel it comes in. And I think when that aspect, I guess what I'll say there is people have so much power to do this. Like you have so much power. Like I have so much power in processing my own emotions. It's just being ready for it, right? Like I think it's also being open to this idea and knowing that there's also the bottom up approach. Like I've got to feel things to some degree, like actually feel them. And how does that look like? Well, it's really hard. It's usually not saying anything at all. And that's where the power of like silence really comes in. So anyways, I've been thinking about that a lot recently with therapy, because it's just like, we could really be doing things much faster. If we don't talk about them. Like there's a whole other way to think about therapy. But not everybody's ready for that.
Yeah. Because I, as someone who has been in therapy before, I think I've been in and out a few times. I always kind of hit that ceiling where it's like, okay, here's the baggage, here's what's happened. I'm already processed it. I'm aware. I've let things go because they no longer serve me to hold on to them. Like,
right.
So I don't know if I'm saying the quote right, but it's basically when you hang on to anger and resentment, it hurts no one but you. Like the other person, it doesn't do anything for them. It doesn't do anything to them, but you're the one that's living with those, living with those negative emotions. So I know enough there. I think you're right, though. I think a lot of people that are like, okay, I've dumped my baggage. And then comes the next part. It's like, now what?
Yeah. And the next part becomes really, is the hardest part, is feeling it. Because we can know things but not understand them, right? Like I know where all these things come from, but we're missing the whole part underneath our shoulders, the rest of our body, where all of this stuff is showing up. So I see a lot of people that will, like, what this is sometimes called, and I'm not saying this in every aspect, but a lot of people will intellectualize. It's a way of kind of processing things. It's like, cool, I know it, I've named it. And it's a fallacy known as the nominal fallacy, which is like, because I've named it, I think I understand it, right? So like, for instance, when I got diagnosed with ADHD, I'm like, oh my God, like that makes so much sense. Like, but then the process of like actually feeling, oh crap, all these things that I heard all my life, just do better, just work harder, all these things. Oh crap. Like now I've actually got to feel that, right?
Right.
So anyways, you laughed there. I'm curious why.
No, I think that's a very I think that's a very I'm not surprised with that response just because it's like you go to therapy to try to find a solution, you found a solution, done. No, that's not, there's more to it than that. So
Yeah.
no, I laughed how you delivered it because I think that that's probably very accurate.
Yeah. It's like when we stop getting curious, it's that's when we that we can get burnt out with therapy, right? We can get like that can show up within the therapy room. You're like, I don't even know what I'm doing. What am I working on? What am I doing? It's like, well,
Yeah.
it's probably time to get curious about like, and I think that's what we don't talk about enough is like there's a whole other aspect to therapy, which is really feeling at the bottom up approach, which frankly a lot of therapists are not trained or even sometimes not even aware of, right? That's a thing. We're trained, a lot of folks, especially in Western America here, we're trained to talk, right?
Yeah.
And I guess what I want to bring here is like there is a lot of power in, as somebody who's talking a lot right now, in not saying a lot. So
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I guess I've never thought about it in that way, but I guess maybe for some athletes why those long runs feel so precious.
Yeah.
Especially because like I'll put my AirPods in when I'm running in LA just because people yell and scream and you want to pretend you don't hear them. But that running, that's that hour of just alone allows you to sit with your shit and just.
And that's why it's like some people describe it as being meditative because you enter that part of your brain where you're not thinking about running anymore.
No.
You've shifted into your subcortex, into a liminal state of where you're actually processing a lot of things and perceiving a lot of things much faster than you would if you were sitting and talking about them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the reason why you have some like not hardcore, but I think you have people that delve into the running world differently. They'll have the ones that do it for exercise. Yep. You have the intermediate advanced folks who are just like, I want to turn my brain off and feel.
Yep.
And the amount of stuff that I've thought about, like aha moments, just from personal levels of just, I feel this way. What does that feel like? Well, if it's because of this, maybe that's, lack of self-worth. Maybe that's, and just kind of understanding who I am on these long runs. So it becomes very meditative, but it becomes also very spiritual.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Because you're tapping into, like I said, that part of the brain that, even with psychedelic experiences, that's where we're going during psychedelic experiences. That is a place in our body where we're really truly getting tapped into the rest of our body. We're becoming more aware and we're becoming outside of, being right behind our eyes is kind of like how I describe it. That's kind of when we're in our neocortex, when we drop down into our body and we become more and more aware of ourselves. Time slows down, like things, and that can, and frankly, that can be jarring for a lot of people that have not experienced something like that, or people that are really in their survival mode, or really in experiencing a lot of, people that regularly burn out or have super high anxiety. It's almost impossible to get to those places without psychedelics or something like that.
I've wanted to try this psychedelic. I had someone on one of my first episodes back in 2022.
Yeah.
I'm forgetting the name, and that's really bad. But it's basically ketamine.
Yeah.
Like ketamine, and you can replicate. But no, there is definitely.
You do? Yeah. I was really curious about it. I have my own like things that and ways of doing. But one, I'm not endorsing this at all, and I'm not saying that everybody should do this. This is my own personal thing. I have found it helpful because, like I said, it allows me to go to that part of my brain and process things much faster and make connections and map my brain in a way that really, I think the ultimate idea of therapy when we sit down is to reach a more understanding of ourselves, really map out the forest of our own mind and experience.
Yeah.
And dropping into that part of our brain, whether that's, and you can do that with a therapist, like for instance, brain spotting or EMDR. I like to use brain spotting. It's a little less intensive. That's really opening up that with the goal of trying to get to that part of the brain. So that could be really helpful in, kind of speed running some processing for some folks.
Yeah. I remember it's called WonderMed is who I had on here. And the founder talked about that as well. That's good to know. That's good to know that that's an option.
Mm-hmm. Again, like you said, these are ways that we can tap into these parts of the brain on a long run. We could do it by even staring and processing in a certain part of our visual field. They found in science is you're able to do that. So you're able to do that in so many ways that I think we don't talk about a lot in Western therapy, that because we're just so used to the talk aspect or the Sopranos kind of effect, right?
Yeah. You just kind of see the person laying on the couch and they just, regurgitate their day. Like, I think there's more to it. We were my husband and I, our honeymoon, we were in Bali. And one of the first things we were supposed to do when we saw the community healer of there's 3 on the island, and we got to meet with one. Mm. And before we stepped in, he asked for us to wipe our feet and to sit in silence. Just to kind of, he didn't need to talk to, he probably said 3 words to us. And it was the most beautiful, refreshing, life-changing experience. And I don't know, it just popped up when you're talking about kind of the power of silence.
And when you think about it, it's like, what is the expectation? The expectation is to just notice. It's just be present. And how often in our day-to-day lives do we have no expectations and we are just present? And where the expectation is to just notice where we're at and who we're with.
Yeah.
That never happens. So it's a really sacred space, right?
Yeah. Well, I think because, people, it's tough. We live in a very busy world where there's lots of to-do lists, lots of things to do. And so you go in or you hop on a call, you talk, and then you leave. There's no, let me sit with the repercussions or let me feel that out. So would you say, kind of shifting to my next question here, for folks that are feeling the burnout, they're on their way, they're not feeling great, they need some course correction. Are there any things, you mentioned kind of just sitting still. Are there any other kind of methodologies or, I don't know, say tips or maybe things that you would recommend implementing into their day?
Sure. Yes. I was, I often get people that come to me and they're just like, hey, I'm looking for tools to help manage my anxiety, to help whatever. I'm looking for tools. And I think it's really what kind of tool are we talking about? And I will ask you, when you think of a tool, what do you think of?
Like a screwdriver?
Right. A hammer. Something that goes in a toolbox. Has one specific purpose, but most of it's at other times that it's existing or is a thing, it's not being used. It's maybe used once, maybe twice. If you're me, who doesn't do a lot of handiwork, their screwdriver's used 3 times a year. Yeah. So those tools, while they may be helpful for a specific thing, I think it's important for us to frame, what are we talking about when we're talking about tools? And I would encourage folks to think of tools more like shoes. Shoes are also a tool. So we use shoes every day. We don't even really think about it, but they provide so much value and well-being for us. So it's I think it's really important to frame tools as looking for things like shoes. What are parts of my life things like shoes that I already use? Things that it's really just noticing things. Where I'm getting at is what brings me energy and what doesn't, and getting intensely curious about that, because that, I think you'd be surprised if you really thought about what truly relaxes me versus distracts me, right? Or is it something that am I looking for a tool because I feel like I need to do something and I need to get better or am I like, I guess what I'm saying is just notice the things that you already have. Like, so for instance, I like to talk to my clients about what does relaxation look like for you? And most of the time it's like, I don't know, laying on my bed. Like, it's not, it's relaxation is actually very active. It's an active thing that we do. So for me, taking my dog to the dog park is relaxing. I walk there, I walk back, I get to think. My dog gets something out of it that makes me happy. There's not a lot of pressures behind that. I get energy by doing that most of the time. I also I love Third Eye Blind. That's like one of my favorite bands ever. And so they bring me so much joy and energy by, like, if I'm feeling crappy or I'm feeling like, God, I just don't have any energy, I could listen to Third Eye Blind immediately. I'm like 10% more relaxed, like whatever, however you want to put it. But I guess what I'm saying is, like, we know these things. We know these different aspects of ourselves that bring us relaxation. And I think it's really important and something I like to do with my clients is, like, make a list of, sit down like for like 15 minutes and think about deeply what relaxes you, and get creative with it. Like, I really like to drive. I like long drives, like 30-minute drives, like just down a road, or not, like, or going somewhere, right? Like a destination. But that's relaxing to me. There's something about that. It's going to be different for everyone. Yeah. And so in that way, it's like, rather than me giving you a hammer of like, yeah, go meditate, go doing, guided, journaling and stuff like that. Sometimes that works for people, but
Right.
it's like a hammer. It's like every now and then it works for a specific thing. And I like to look for shoes. Like, I like to find, like, okay, you actually know more about yourself than I do. And I can sit here and give you 10 different things to go try, but
Yeah.
you'd forget all of them. You'd maybe try them once and it wouldn't be that helpful. So I guess reframing how we think about tools to, like,
Okay.
getting really curious about what relaxes me. And those things can be small, they can be big. Like, going to Bali is like super relaxing for me, right? I really like going to Japan. That's like my place, right? That's a very relaxing place for me.
Yeah.
So those there can be big things, and there can be very small things of where it's just like getting outside and getting 30 seconds of sun sometimes is helpful. But these are all active things that we're doing that are kind of tools. Like, these are little things that noticing of, like, okay, I've only got 2 minutes before my next session or whatever. I'm gonna go outside and get some sun. Do I need some water? I need some water. Like, that noticing is a tool in itself. I've said a lot. I'm gonna shut up now. So
No. I think that was I love that, because I use the word tool, and I think I even use that to an extent where it's like, especially like on my recent podcast, I talked about like anxiety and overcoming it, and I've got my tools.
Yeah.
And I didn't really think about it in the way versus a screwdriver versus a shoe. But I can definitely see, I mean, that's what a tool is. When you think about a tool, you go to a hammer and all that, rather than implementing practices throughout your day to make it so much easier or manageable.
Yeah.
So
That over a long time, even just noticing these are the things, or doing them more regularly, provides us more relaxation. It conserves our energy. Whereas, like, a lot of people, when they get stressed, they just watch TV or they'll crack open a beer. All these things that distract us and turn our brain off. It's a quick way, but ultimately don't give us energy. And I think it's really important to think about I think it's one of the most important things we could do, is because I think we've gotten so overwhelmed. I think it's just generally, I think I can make a gross generalization here of, like, especially in America, we are a culture of overwhelm, of attention, that when we can learn to hone our attention to, to finding these things again, there's a lot of power in that.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Damn. Okay. So my last question before we go into rapid fire question is, if people wanted to know more about you, how to get in touch with you, should I just put a link to your website? How would
Sure.
you, is
Yeah,
that the best way?
redden.com. That's probably the easiest way to find me. Like, I think all my socials are on there.
Okay.
Yeah, that's probably the best way.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Jumping into rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Okay. Do you have a favorite place that you've traveled to?
Oh, Japan for sure. Yeah. That is. There's something about that little. What is it? Is it an archipelago or is it a? It's something. It's not an island, but it's. Anyways, there's something about that little that stretch of land that's just like, gosh,
Peaceful.
yeah. The Japanese have got to figure it out. That's just such a great place. It's so quiet. I don't know. I love it. So I try to go there as much as I can. So
I'm that way. I just am that way with Hawaii.
there you go.
I will make any
Hawaii's.
excuse.
I mean, like same route. I mean, that is the ideal for me, at least at this point. Is like, okay, a couple days in Hawaii, or 4 days in Hawaii, week or two in Japan, or vice versa. Like that's to me. That's it.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see if there's any sort of studies on how certain people have deeper connections with certain part of the world than others. Like I went to Japan. It was very peaceful, but I don't have an inclination to go back. But like,
sure.
I signed up for a marathon in Hawaii this year just so that I could find an excuse to get my ass back. You know what I mean? Like it'd be cool to see like what is in the makeup of humans to connect to certain parts of the world.
And I think that's our own psychology too. Like I've grown up with the fascination of like France. There's places that I find very romantic, like which is Japan and France. And I think there's certain experiences that I had as a kid. So for instance, I really like John Mayer. I don't know why I have to say this so much, but it really was a dream. It was very formative to me when I was a kid. And he like went to Japan to go get his sleeve tattoo or whatever. And he like made this video that was very romantic of Japan. I think it's still on YouTube. And he put music to it, and I just remember thinking, "Gosh!" Like, and so I have this romantic feeling of it that I think was placed at the right time. And then Phoenix is like my favorite band. They're from France, and I think there's something about the way that they make music that's it's also just because they did a Leblagatech thing. There's a video. It's called Leblagatech that. They filmed Phoenix doing something, and so I had this romantic, by extension, France and Japan. So I think that for me, I think it's everybody's own psychology of like.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true. That's very true. Okay, next question. This isn't really rapid fire, but I just stuck it in here. What drives you? Inspiration or aspiration or goals?
Yeah. I think kind of something I've talked about a lot on today is curiosity. I've really found that being a lifelong learner is really important to me. And I also believe that curiosity is foundational for love. I think that is something that I found in my couples work of like when people stop being curious, understanding kind of falls apart. So so being a lifelong learner, being intensely curious, which I'm just so lucky that comes very natural to me. I'm infinitely curious and interested in people and life. So I got lucky there.
I like that. What is one thing you want listeners to know about you?
That I don't know anything. I don't know what I'm talking about. And that's by design. I don't know anything. Again, kind of going back to that curiosity of where it's like the more that I can not assume things, the more peaceful my life is. I think most of the world's problems are from people assuming things or assuming that they know things, and I try not to do that. So, yeah, I like not knowing things.
Okay, what are 3 things that you're grateful for?
My wife, my daughter, and my dog. That's an easy one. Where it's like kind of going back to the power of silence, man. I've learned so much from my dog and my daughter, neither who can talk, right? Like, I think that's an interesting aspect. And my wife she's my rock. She's just so great. So between the 3 of them, it's, I've learned so much about myself and life that I'm just super grateful for them. Yeah.
Well, that concludes the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. And another thing I'm grateful is this time together. I really appreciate you having me.
Well, of course. Of course, I'm very excited you were able to hop on. This is
Yeah.
awesome.